as needs rise and your capacity lowers, it can feel like a real squeeze. Hello, and welcome to Feeling Money, where we explore where money meets real life. I'm your host, Rachel Kinney. I'm a financial therapist who is curious about the meaning and power that money has in our individual stories, in our relationships, and in our wider communities. Let's get to it. Hello, and welcome to Feeling Money. This is our advice show, Ask a Financial Therapist. I'm Rachel Kinney, your host, and I am here back with Michael Woodnorth. We interviewed him on the last podcast, so if you haven't checked that out, you can check it out in the past feed. Michael is the founder and CEO of Woodnorth Advisory, a consultancy offering strategic growth and capital advisory services to mission-driven organizations. Originally from Chicago, he moved to Nashville 7 years ago to start his career and served in various roles from investment banking to nonprofit management before starting his own company. He is married and enjoys spending time with his friends outside and trying new vegan foods. Michael, we're so happy to have you on Ask a Financial Therapist.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
So let's jump into our questions. Our first question we got from Reddit. The question is, how do I not tie my self-worth, self-esteem to money? I constantly fall into the trap of thinking I am less than because I make less than other people. As our guest, I will throw it to you first, Michael.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a tough one. And I will start by saying that you are not alone. This is something that is present across the entire socioeconomic spectrum. I've had poor friends, I've had rich friends, and in a capitalist type of society, it's easy to confuse net worth with personal worth. And it's a challenge that I've not even overcome completely myself, especially as an entrepreneur. There's so much focus and emphasis and pressure on financial success and what that looks like. And so I can't speak to what the secret is to get out of that mindset, but I can share my experience. The most important thing for me in this context is my faith. And as a Christian, I recognize that my value comes from being a child of God. And I try to remind myself of that on a daily basis, and that I'm valuable to my community regardless of what my income is. But if you want to think about practical applications and ways to change your mindset through behaviors, thinking about what other people do in your life that makes you happy or makes you feel valued, and paying attention to those things and writing those things down, and paying attention to the things that you do with your friends that make you feel valued or valuable or happy and give you a sense of fulfillment, whether that's being a good listener, a good friend, showing up for somebody. It's often the basic things that matter the most. And so if you can try to focus your attention or your time or your conversation or, your internal dialogues about self-worth on those things more than what hits your checking account every month, that could be a good start. Rachel, you may be more qualified to speak on this than I am, but I'd love to hear your opinion.
I loved your answer, and I think that that's so true, focusing on value. I've struggled with this myself, so I really want to say that you're not alone. And one thing that helps me just in my own life is I work on a sliding scale in my therapy practice. So that means that one person who's getting an hour of therapy might pay $40 and one person might pay $100, right? I'm doing the same effort. I'm putting out the same care and the same quality and the same attunement. That price is based on what they can pay, not on how present I am. So I like to think about that sometimes because it's helpful for me to remember that my work is not what is being paid for. My work is what I'm doing. My work is sometimes even unpaid. I think about people raising children, and that work is so valuable and so important, and we don't put a price on it in this society. And that doesn't mean that it's not one of the most important things that people do. And I think Michael is so right about thinking about value outside of cost value, but value as something different, as something spiritual or intangible or so meaningful. And thinking about all the ways we show up in unpaid ways, friendship, relationship, the things that at the end of the day are probably the most important things in our life. And I think kind of turning up the volume on that value is really important, and the things that make us feel worthy and valued and not in a monetary way, that can be so important. And I think also doing some reality checking around who you're comparing yourself to, right? So they've done some studies that show that we never look at people doing worse than us when we are comparing ourselves. We always, like everybody looks, especially when we're talking about money, looks upward, looks toward the people making more than them. So this is why even really, really rich people that we would consider rich, like millionaires, they don't consider themselves rich because they're comparing themselves to billionaires. So they've done studies about this. So I would just say it's sometimes helpful to do a reality check and actually think about, oh, how much do I have? What are the gifts that I have in my life? What abundance is there? What can I be grateful for? Because my guess is that you're honestly doing better than a lot of other people, at least financially or monetarily. And we just can get really focused on any comparison that makes us feel bad oftentimes. So I think turning up the volume on the places and spaces where you really get to be yourself and get to show up and you feel valued and worthy. For Michael, that's faith. And for other people, that's relationship. And for other people, that might be creativity, that might be art, that might be being an amazing neighbor.
That's a really interesting response, because I think you identified something culturally that is very real and very toxic. And that's the sort of others focus that so many of us in the United States have. And there's the old saying, keeping up with the Joneses, but that's so real. And it's so in our face as millennials with Instagram, Facebook, all these things where we can constantly see what everyone else's best experiences are. And so it can be very tempting to benchmark ourselves against that. But you also mentioned gratitude, and that reminded me of a practice that I implemented for a while, just based on advice from an executive coach that I worked with. And she had me journal every day 3 things that were energizing, 3 things that were draining, and then 3 things that I was grateful for. And the things that were energizing were never money. It's never like, got a paycheck today, woo. And the things that were draining were just like some sort of emotional experience. The things I was grateful for were always more simple and like tangible, value-driven pieces of gratitude. And so it could be a helpful way to focus on the other things in your life that are valuable or that you're grateful for that are not money. And maybe you journal and make a rule that you're not allowed to talk about money in those things, just so you can try to intentionally shift the focus away from that means of measuring yourself.
Right. And it really depends on who the other person is that you're comparing yourself to. Because Michael, you make a really great point. Like if this is, your twin sister, somebody that you know so well, then we're talking about maybe family issues, or maybe you grow up in a family where you're supposed to make a lot of money and you're not. And so exploring some of that family of origin or emotional things in your relationship, who you're comparing yourself to, it really kind of matters. That can often give us some clues about where we need to do our work. But if this is just kind of a general comparison, you might be comparing yourself to people on Instagram or to people that you just have a general sense of. And to be honest, we do not know what's happening in other people's financial lives. And so just reminding ourselves that the person driving the really nice car possibly could not really afford that.
Rented it.
There's a saying like it could be all flash and no cash, so we don't really know what other people's financial lives look like, and we don't know what their personal lives look like. So again, not allowing people's highlight reels on Instagram to shape our real lives.
Yeah, that is a very good point.
So our next question is a little bit more specific. I love these questions. We got this one through email. This one says, I'm a program manager at a nonprofit that I love, but I'm getting a bit burnt out. The pandemic has made us all take a pay cut, and we're working the same hours with people who need more help. I feel like my love for helping others can only get me so far, especially when I have school debt and I'm still trying to pay off. I've thought about going back to school. I've thought about switching careers, but I've been at this nonprofit for 8 years with very little change in pay, and I'm not sure how to switch over to the business world or if I have the energy to go back to grad school or take on more debt. What do you recommend? So the first thing that I recommend is just take a deep breath, because this is a lot, and I hear the burnout. And I've been there, and it's a really hard place to be, especially when need is rising and your capacity and your wherewithal, especially if you right now are living through a pandemic, your capacity is more limited. And as needs rise and your capacity lowers, it can feel like a real squeeze. And I just want to honor that and say that I see that, and I felt that before. And so doing what you can right now in your life to create some space, whatever that is for you, if that's journaling or taking walks or doing art or playing music or anything, lighting candles, whatever brings you kind of that feeling of relaxation and space in a place where you can just be. I really encourage you to spend some time there. You're considering a lot of different things, going back to school, you're considering switching careers. And when you have so many things on the table, I think the best place to go is to a place of wondering about things and beginning to write questions down that you have and not giving in to the lure of urgency around this. Especially when we're burnt out, it's like, I need to change right now. And so just building some space in your life where you can just sit down and wonder and really brainstorm, okay, who do I want to talk to about this? Who in my life has made the career switch? Who in my life has gone back to school? And you don't say what you're interested in, but who in my life is in this realm? Who can I talk to? And just have these conversations. And I think those conversations will also be really validating and connecting for you, which might be important right now, because you have these skills. You have worked for this nonprofit for 8 years, and there are skills that you have, and it might just be, we talked about this on our last pod about learning how to translate that into the business world. It might be about learning how to translate that into a higher paying job at a different nonprofit. But I would just say, first things first, don't give in to the urgency to change everything immediately, and to accept that you're at limited capacity, and to just honor the work that you are doing and give yourself permission to not show up 110% all the time, and really honor the energy that you have and its limitation right now. Michael, what do you think?
Well, I think a lot of the things that you just pointed out are very important. Self-care, self-awareness, focus on your experience and your goals and your desires are all very important and should be taken seriously. I think it's easy to have a focus shift away from those things, but in the long run, that's where you need to keep your focus in order to have a life that is personally rewarding. So just second on everything that you just said.
Yeah.
And when I hear this question, I'm someone who has had several career transitions. I went from, we talked about in the last podcast about me going from banking, going back to school, and then from school to nonprofit, and then from nonprofit to entrepreneurship. And so I've jumped off a lot of cliffs. And I also understand burnout and work-related anxiety and the discomfort that comes from that. And on a personal level, I think it's important to come to grips with the fact that at the end of the day, you have to be happy with doing your best. and having given it your best that day, because you can't do more than you can do. And so to create those expectations or those pressures on yourself can be toxic and damaging. But from a tactical perspective, you also don't want to leave a job just to leave a job and not have your next steps planned out. And so that could be turning a side hustle into a business. That could be going back to school. That could be a different job. But I guess I would resist the temptation to get out because of burnout without having something to jump to. And when you're making those decisions about what's next, the financial analyst in me wants to point at the cost of education, the cost of a job search, and then your expected increase in income from whatever decisions those are to try and assess what the repayment of your decision looks like. But you also have to take into consideration the things that Rachel said and think about, who do you want to be as a person? What is going to bring you joy, and what type of career path or vocation you think will create meaning for you, and do your best to reconcile the personal side with the financial side of the decision that's in front of you, and make your best decision and stick to it. I don't believe that there is a quote unquote right decision every time that you're faced with a fork in the road, but there's really just the decision you make and your decision to stick to that decision. Yeah, I would just encourage you to maybe take your foot off the gas in terms of the pressure that you're putting on yourself, and also really develop that internal understanding of where you want to go directionally, and take a look at the financial implications of your decisions as well.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I suggested those conversations is that I think oftentimes, especially when we feel like we're cornered, one of our impulses, and maybe I'm speaking personally, is like, okay, I'm just going to go back to school. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of different routes we can take, and a lot of different, my guess is that you already have a lot of really important skills. And so there might be a way to make this switch or make this transition without having to take on a lot more debt, or to give that time to school. Again, if you feel this call to go be a doctor, maybe that's different. But it sounds like this is maybe I'll just go back to school. And if it's there, I would just encourage you to talk to other people who've made switches or are in careers that seem interesting to you, or are working at different nonprofits, just to see how they did it. And oftentimes that's just by rethinking the skills they already have, or taking, a few classes here or there, or Coursera's, or learning just a new skill that you don't need to go into debt for.
Yeah, that's, I think, a good piece of advice, is to try and connect with people who have been there and have made the switch, and just see what you can learn from them about the outcomes of the decision, but also how they made the decision. And that could be really enlightening at this juncture.
But good luck, and you're not alone, and you're trying your best. And we know right now for nonprofit workers, it is very tough. And so we just want to say that we see you, and good luck. Our last question is really great, I think, for this pandemic, because I think this is a question that I have too. So I'm going to let Michael answer it first. So, our question is, how do you find the right balance between saving enough money to feel safe and secure in this capitalist hellscape versus hoarding wealth that could be used to enrich your life / better your community? All right, Michael, help me out here.
Yeah, thanks for passing that off. This is such an important decision to make. And I feel like the root of the question is, how do I decide what is enough? Mm-hmm. And that word enough is so challenging on so many different levels, because the implications in terms of your lifestyle and your ability to help others are huge. My advice would be to start with defining what enough is for your lifestyle and the lifestyle that you want to have, and really invite people who you're close with into that process. I believe in this notion of having a board of directors for your life. So 4 or 5 people who love you unconditionally and are going to be around and will challenge your thinking and also support you in making big judgment calls in your life. Maybe it's a spouse, a best friend, a sibling, a parent, or any combination of the above. Inviting those people into helping you decide what enough looks like. Do I want a studio apartment and a modest grocery expenditure and these other accoutrements to my life? Or do I think that I need to have a house and a yard and these other different pieces of life that are going to make me feel content and fulfilled and happy, and make a decision about what enough is and what enough costs, and then force yourself to stick to it. Build a plan, build a budget, decide anything that I make above a certain level is going to be what I'm going to use to enrich my life or better my community or give to a nonprofit or save up for school or, whatever that personal or community enrichment looks like. And just have an understanding of the number and commit yourself to that number and take good advice from your community about defining that number. And that will at least give you some objectivity in your decision making about what to save, what to give away. And, you can past that number that is enough. You can decide on a month-to-month basis how much to give away, how much to spend on yourself, how much to save up for a trip. And you can feel confident in that number being the right number and your ability to support your lifestyle, which you've determined is enough.
Yeah, I love that because I think that's very similar to what I was thinking about, which is I love the idea of if you have a steady income, deciding percentage-wise how much you want to give away, how much you want to, put into your trip fund or your adoption fund or whatever you're saving for, and then putting the rest in your savings account, but making the choice that with each paycheck that comes in or money that does come in, giving a certain percent to each thing that means something to you. And how you divvy up those percentages, I think, is Michael's spot on. It's about having intentionally chosen that, because where we can get a little bit obsessive or a little bit anxiety or scarcity mindset is if we give into the sense of, oh, I just need to save everything right now. I just need to save it all. Or I need to tuck this away under my mattress, as opposed to saying, okay, we're in a pandemic. It might be really good to have, 2 extra months of spending, 2 extra months of our rent saved up. So maybe we work on that. Maybe we decide that that's what we want to do, save that, and then go back to our regular giving and spending on eating out or takeout or things that enrich your life, whatever those are. But I think being really intentional about the number and making a decision about it is so important, because that helps us get away from this scarcity hoarding mindset of, I just need more. I just need to save more, or I just need to have more. So Michael's right. It's really, especially if you have a partner, especially if you have a family, doing that in community can be really helpful, and making an intentional decision and then writing it down somewhere so that when you do have maybe that moment of panic of like, should I have like 2 years of our expenses saved up? You go back to your spreadsheet or your budget and you look and you say, oh no, I've thought about this before. I've decided that this is what feels right to me. And you can kind of take a deep breath and remember that what you're listening to is probably more fear talking than it is what you actually want in that moment.
Yeah. And with all this advice, I think it's also important to have grace for yourself and have flexibility and an understanding that you may not get it right in the first month and you may want to change your mind later on, and just being open to adjustments along the way and not beating yourself up if you miss a number or you miss your target, and instead gracefully responding internally and saying like, hey, it's okay. I wanted to do this. I might have fallen short by a little bit, but that's okay. Next month is a new month, and I'm going to adapt to the circumstances around me. And I'll change my behavior to address what my long-term goals are.
Right. Yeah. You can always change in the next month, and there is no perfect formula. And I think that's really important. But I do think it's important that you intentionally create your formula.
Yeah, you got to try. You got to try. Absolutely.
Yeah. This is a great question. And I also think this is just a question that you should just ask yourself periodically. I think that this is one of those questions that gets to just live with us in this society. And it's not a question that we necessarily ever perfectly solve, but it's a helpful question to ask of checking in on our emotions and saying, okay, why am I saving? Is this to create a safety net? Is this for security? Or has it gotten to a point of where it feels like I'm hoarding or I'm fearful?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Rachel.
So yeah, we can ask this question again in a year.
Yeah. Keep checking in.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael, for your amazing advice.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It was really great. You're very wise. I love it.
Thanks.
Listeners, you can find Michael and Woodnorth Advisory on Twitter at WoodnorthADV. His Instagram is Woodnorth Advisory, and the LinkedIn page is Woodnorth Advisory LLC. And you can find Feeling Money on Instagram at Feeling Money, on Twitter at Feeling Money Pod, and at feelingmoney.com. Thanks for listening. Remember to subscribe, and we'll see you back in the feed in 2 weeks.